It was a crisp autumn morning in Washington, D.C., the air filled with anticipation and tension. JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, had just wrapped up a private briefing with senior staffers in the West Wing. The press conference that was scheduled that afternoon was expected to be routine, standard updates on bipartisan legislation, economic figures, and a few updates from President Trump's office. But the press pool had other plans. JD Vance, a best-selling author, veteran, and intellectual firebrand of the America First movement, had never shied away from tough questions. His journey from a poverty-stricken childhood in Middletown, Ohio, to Yale Law School to the halls of power had earned him both admirers and critics. And at the center of that journey was Usha Vance, his brilliant Indian-American wife. The press had largely kept their questions respectful in the past. But recently, a narrative had begun to swirl, one orchestrated by liberal media outlets trying to poke holes in the administration's armor. JD and Usha Vance had become targets. That day, a particular CNN reporter, Dana Winslow, a rising star in progressive circles, had something more than policy on her mind. The White House press room was buzzing. Cameras clicked. Pens hovered above notepads. JD Vance stepped up to the podium in his Navy suit and American flag pin. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'll begin with a few updates on the president's visit to Michigan." "Vice President Vance," Dana interrupted, not even waiting for his preamble to finish. "Before we get into policy, I have a personal question about your wife, Usha." JD gave a tight smile. "Dana, we typically keep these briefings focused on the work the American people elected us to do. But go ahead." "Thank you," Dana said, her tone syrupy but sharp. "Usha Vance has avoided nearly all public appearances since you took office. Some are wondering, what is she hiding? Is she uncomfortable supporting a Trump administration that many believe is hostile to immigrants, despite being an immigrant herself?" A hush fell over the room. JD Vance's expression didn't waver, but there was a shift in his eyes, cold steel meeting fire. With respect, he began calmly, "My wife is a private citizen, a constitutional law scholar, and a mother to our children. She didn't run for office, I did. Her not being at every public function is not a scandal. It's called having a life." Dana leaned in. "But don't you think it's relevant that she comes from a liberal academic background? Isn't it fair to question how much influence she has on your political decisions? After all, she clerked for Chief Justice Roberts." Now JD's voice dropped half a tone, measured but thunderous. "Let me tell you something about Usha," he said, his tone cutting through the silence like a blade. "She's the most brilliant person I've ever met. She challenges me, she sharpens my thinking, and she has sacrificed more than the public will ever know so that I could serve this country. If your idea of journalism is digging through the personal life of a private citizen for political dirt, then maybe the problem isn't her silence, it's your noise." Gasps echoed in the room. But Dana pressed on. "So you're saying she has no influence on your policies?" JD smirked. "I'm saying my wife influences me the same way any decent spouse would, with wisdom, love, and a deep sense of right and wrong. But if you think I'm taking marching orders from my wife while sitting in the Situation Room with the president, you've watched too many Netflix dramas." Chuckles rippled across the room. But JD wasn't done. "And let me be clear," he said, stepping closer to the mic, voice rising. "If Usha Vance were out there giving interviews every week, you'd be accusing her of trying to run the White House. If she stays home to raise our kids and contribute in her own way, she's hiding. Pick a lane." Dana shifted in her seat, visibly rattled. JD Vance looked around the room. "Any more policy questions? Or are we doing tabloids today?" JD Vance's fiery response to Dana Winslow's intrusive questioning went viral within minutes. Clips of the exchange flooded social media like wildfire. Conservative influencers praised the vice president's composure, hailing it as a masterclass in dignity. Hashtags like #ProtectUsha and #JDVanceOwnsMedia trended on X, formerly Twitter. Even some moderate voices acknowledged the unfairness of dragging Usha Vance into the political spotlight. But on the other side, liberal pundits on MSNBC and The Atlantic fired back. Headlines read, "Why is the vice president so defensive about his wife? Transparency or control? The curious silence of Usha Vance." The narrative was being spun hard. Back at the White House, JD sat in his office watching snippets of the coverage with a grim face. President Trump strolled in, holding a Diet Coke, chuckling like he'd just watched a rerun of The Apprentice. "That was one hell of a performance, JD," Trump said. "Tremendous. I mean it. You hit her like a freight train." JD smiled faintly. "Didn't feel good, Mr. President. I don't like having to defend my wife like that in public." Trump nodded, putting a hand on JD's shoulder. Let me tell you something. They're scared. That's why they're going after her. They know a strong family man, a guy with real principles like you, is a threat. They couldn't take me down, so now they're going after everyone around us. JD sighed, I just want to serve the country, not drag Usha into the circus. Trump grinned. Well, son, welcome to the circus. But don't worry, we've got the bigger elephants. Meanwhile, Dana Winslow wasn't backing down either. That night on CNN, she doubled down on her position. I asked a fair question, she said during her segment, The Winslow Report. This administration talks endlessly about family values and transparency. Why is it suddenly off limits to ask about the vice president's wife, especially when she comes from a vastly different ideological world? Her guest, a progressive author, chimed in, we need to examine the influence spouses have. Usha may not be elected, but her worldview matters if it's shaping national policy. But viewers weren't entirely buying it. The comments section flooded with criticism. Why not ask about Joe Biden's influence then? Usha Vance didn't sign up for this. You lost the argument when JD spoke with grace while you acted like TMZ. By the following morning, JD's staff was flooded with interview requests from Fox News, The Daily Wire, Newsmax, and even international outlets like the BBC and Times of India. Still, JD kept his focus. At his next public appearance, a town hall in Columbus, Ohio, he chose to address the elephant in the room. After opening remarks on job creation and veterans care, a local woman stood up and asked, Mr. Vice President, how's Usha holding up through all this? The room hushed again. JD smiled warmly. She's doing what she always does, holding our family together, keeping me grounded, and reminding me why I got into public service in the first place. Applause broke out across the hall. But let me say something to everyone here, he continued. We are entering a new era of American politics. One where privacy is mistaken for secrecy. Where being measured is mistaken for weakness. But we're not going to play that game. He paused, scanning the audience. We love this country. And Usha Vance is just as American as anyone in this room, no matter what her last name or heritage says. And if defending her means upsetting a few cable news anchors, then so be it. I'm not here to win their approval. I'm here to serve you. That clip, too, went viral. By now, the liberal media's narrative was unraveling. Usha Vance still hadn't spoken publicly. But she didn't need to. Her silence was her shield. And JD was her sword. It was a week later when things escalated. JD Vance had returned to Capitol Hill to preside over a Senate vote concerning immigration reform, an issue he'd long championed. But behind the scenes, whispers were growing louder. A left-leaning digital outlet, The Progressive Current, claimed to have unearthed conflicting details about Usha Vance's past associations during her time at Yale. It was a weak story, vague accusations about her being part of a civil liberties student group and volunteering for a refugee legal clinic. There was nothing illegal or unethical. But the angle was obvious, paint Usha as too liberal, subtly implying that JD was either a hypocrite or being controlled. The real blow came when Dana Winslow announced, live on CNN, that Usha Vance had refused multiple interview requests. Transparency matters, Dana intoned. The American people deserve to know who's whispering in the vice president's ear. JD's phone buzzed endlessly. Staffers, friends, even conservative pundits wanted a response. But JD waited. He had something planned. The opportunity came sooner than expected. JD Vance was invited to appear on a primetime Sunday political show, America Now, hosted by veteran journalist Carl Mendel. He accepted, knowing Dana Winslow would be on the guest panel. It was exactly the setting he wanted. On the day of the appearance, the entire country seemed to tune in. JD arrived early, sleeves rolled up, calm but prepared for war. The segment began with standard policy discussion, interest rates, inflation, China. JD laid out his arguments clearly, winning praise even from center-left commentators. Then came the final segment. Carl Mendel turned to Dana. Dana, I understand you wanted to follow up with the vice president about a personal matter? Dana smiled politely, masking her claws. Yes, thank you, Carl. Mr. Vice President, once again, our viewers want to understand who's influencing you behind the scenes. Your wife, Usha Vance, has an academic record tied to progressive causes. Can you assure the American people that she doesn't undermine or conflict with your administration's priorities? JD nodded slowly as if weighing every word. Dana, he began, have you ever been married? Caught off guard, she replied, that's irrelevant. No, it's not, JD cut in, his voice even. Because if you had, you'd know something. Marriage isn't about echo chambers. It's about challenge, growth, trust. My wife and I don't agree on everything. That's why I trust her more than any yes man I've ever met. Dana opened her mouth to reply, but JD kept going. Do you want to talk about influence? Fine. Usha influences me to think critically, to never react out of ego, to lead with principle, not pressure. If that's a scandal, then every decent husband in America should be under investigation. The room went silent. Carl Mendel looked stunned. Dana tried again. But Mr. Vice President. No, let me finish, JD said. You want to know why she won't talk to you? Because she's smart. Because she knows what this is. This isn't about transparency. This is about humiliation. You want her to step into the ring so you can twist her words, dig into her background, and fit her into your narrative. JD leaned forward, eyes locked on the camera now. Well, here's my narrative. Usha Vance is not running for office. I am. And I was elected not in spite of her, but because I stand beside a woman who challenges me to be better every single day. Applause broke out off camera from the studio crew. JD sat back in his chair, calm as ever. Dana Winslow stared ahead, speechless. It was over. The clip would go on to rack up 28 million views within 48 hours. And it was only getting started. The Monday morning after JD's fiery TV appearance, the media was in total meltdown mode. Fox News ran the segment on a loop. Tucker Carlson, back with a vengeance, called it the greatest takedown of the corporate press in modern American history. Meanwhile, CNN, MSNBC, and even the New York Times scrambled to pivot. Some anchors tried to frame JD's comments as evasive. Others questioned his tone. But none could deny one thing. JD Vance had just dominated the national conversation, and he did it not with shouting but with dignity. Still, Usha Vance remained silent. That silence had become symbolic. For conservatives, it was strength. For moderates, it was grace. Even many liberal independents admitted privately they respected her privacy, especially in an age where every political spouse was treated like a co-candidate. But the story wasn't over yet. That Wednesday, JD and Usha attended a charity gala in Cincinnati for a veterans education initiative. It was their first public appearance together since the media storm. JD wore his usual classic navy suit. Usha, graceful as ever, wore a deep burgundy sari, a nod to her Indian heritage. As they entered the ballroom, flashbulbs went off. Reporters were kept at a distance, but JD made one thing clear. Tonight isn't about politics. It's about honoring our veterans. Please respect that. And they did. At least until later that evening when JD was approached by a young Navy vet named Miguel, who had lost both legs in Afghanistan. Mr. Vice President, Miguel said, shaking his hand firmly, I just want to say, the way you stood up for your wife, that meant a lot to guys like me. We don't always say it, but loyalty matters. JD was taken aback. He gripped Miguel's hand tightly. Thank you for your service, and for reminding me what this fight's really about. The conversation was short, but it made the rounds on social media. Photos of JD and Usha with veterans, JD kneeling beside Miguel's wheelchair, Usha speaking softly with a Gold Star mother. They went viral in a different way. Not as controversy, but as class. And then, without warning, Usha Vance made her first public statement. She didn't go on TV. She didn't hold a press conference. Instead, she posted a single message on X. I married JD because he is honest, fearless, and rooted in something far deeper than politics. I'm proud of him, and grateful to every American who believes our family, like yours, deserves respect and privacy. No hashtags, no attacks, just a calm, measured response. Within minutes, her post exploded. It was shared by Elon Musk, Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, and even Oprah Winfrey, who wrote, "A woman of substance. America needs more Ushas." The tide had turned. Even longtime critics of JD began walking back their statements. One Democratic strategist anonymously told Politico, "We overplayed our hand. Going after Usha backfired big time." Back in Washington, President Trump summoned JD to the Oval Office. As always, Trump didn't mince words. "You killed it," he said, grinning. "That girl of yours? Class act. You've got something we didn't have in 2016. What's that, sir?" JD asked. Trump leaned in, voice low and serious. "Unbreakable dignity." JD didn't smile. He just nodded, humbled. Because deep down he knew the battle wasn't really about Usha or even himself. It was about something bigger, the soul of American discourse. And in that war, silence had spoken louder than any scream. 2 weeks after the viral showdown on America Now, the media storm had mostly died down. JD Vance had not only survived, it seemed he had emerged stronger, more resolute, and with a deeper bond to the public. His defense of Usha wasn't just political, it was deeply personal, and Americans across the spectrum respected that. But then came the final twist. A major Sunday feature in the Washington Viewpoint, a publication known for its progressive slant, dropped a lengthy article titled, "The Vice President's Wife, a Hidden Power?" It was supposed to be a profile piece on Usha Vance. But JD and his team saw it for what it was, a final, desperate hit job disguised as journalism. The article dredged up old college writings, hinted at radical influences which amounted to a law professor who once marched for civil rights, and even included quotes from anonymous sources who claimed Usha had reservations about Trump's leadership style in 2016. There was one line that stood out like a dagger. One wonders whether Usha's silence is grace or guilt. That was it. The final straw. JD Vance called a press conference, not in D.C., but in Dayton, Ohio, his home turf. The event was simple. No fanfare. Just a microphone, a flag, and a crowd of working-class Americans who had watched his journey since his hillbilly elegy days. When JD stepped up to the podium, the silence was thick. Cameras rolled. The nation waited. "I wasn't going to speak on this again," JD began, "because I believed, naively, that dignity would be enough to stop this madness. But apparently, it's not." He held up a printed copy of the Washington Viewpoint article, shaking it once before placing it down gently. "This is not journalism. This is obsession. This is what happens when the media elite can't defeat your ideas, so they go after your family. My wife, the mother of my children, a woman who has never run for office, who has never sought the spotlight, who works quietly to help immigrants find justice within the law she loves." He paused, voice low, filled with restrained rage. If this article had said the same things about the spouse of a Democrat, say, Michelle Obama or Jill Biden, it would be labeled racist, sexist, and repugnant. And you know what? It would be. Because it's wrong. Every time. The crowd murmured in agreement. "I want to be crystal clear," JD said, leaning in, eyes burning into the lens. "Usha Vance is a better American than any of the cowards hiding behind anonymous sources. She has done more for this country's integrity, education, and justice system than most of these pundits and editors will do in their lifetimes." He paused again, just long enough. "You want to destroy me? Fine. I signed up for this. But you don't get to touch her. Not anymore. Not ever again." Then, like a line from a movie, he added one final punch. "Next time you want to write about someone's wife, write about your own." Mic drop. The next day, public opinion polling showed something extraordinary. JD Vance's favorability ratings shot up 12 points nationwide, especially among independent women and suburban families. Even more shocking? A letter from the editor of the Washington Viewpoint was released the following weekend. It read, in part, "Upon reflection, our recent feature on Usha Vance did not meet our standards of fairness. We apologize to the Vice President and his family." A retraction. A full apology. From a progressive outlet. That never happened. JD had done what very few politicians could do, forced the media to admit it crossed the line. And in doing so, he had carved out a new kind of leadership, one not built on bluster or populist fury, but on honor. Back at home that night, JD found Usha sitting on their back porch, sipping tea. "You didn't have to do all that," she said quietly without looking up. JD smiled and sat beside her. "Yes, I did," he replied. "Because they thought they could bully the one person I love more than anything in this world. And now? Now they know better." Usha reached for his hand. And in that quiet moment, beneath the stars of a free nation, they both knew the truth. The battle had been ugly. But they had won. Not just in politics, but in principle.